I think it's safe to assume that we've all heard the saying, children are the future. We must do what is best for them, which is a completely valid statement. Children are the future. They are future doctors, lawyers, politicians, engineers, CEOs, teachers, firefighters, whatever career path they wish to follow. But it's when children become teenagers that they realize this power they have, this power of being the future. And what I find to be so admirable is that teenagers all over the world are taking action. They're not waiting to be the future, they're changing it. For instance, Greta Thunberg. She's a 17-year-old climate activist from Sweden who has made global headlines over the last year for her work on raising awareness of this crisis that our Earth is currently facing. In September of 2019, Greta spoke at the United Nations Climate Summit, in which she condemned world leaders for constantly relying on young people for hope and ideas, and in return giving them nothing but false promises. Instead of spending her teenage years at school or playing sports with her friends, Greta is spending her time fighting to change the future that her generation is supposed to inherit from us. Malala Yousafzai began her fight for a better future when she was just 12 years old. At the time, Malala lived in a Taliban-controlled area of Pakistan, in which girls were often forbidden from attending school. But over time, Malala became famous after writing for the BBC, starring in a documentary, and being nominated for an award by humanitarian Desmond Tutu for her work on advocating for girls' rights to education. In 2012, while on her way home from school, Malala was shot in the head by a Taliban gunman. She was just 15 years old at the time. But after her miraculous recovery, Malala went on to write an autobiography, continue her work with the help of the United Nations, and win a Nobel Peace Prize, all before the age of reaching 20. And last fall, protests broke out across Indonesia in which 2 teenage students were killed by law enforcement. These demonstrations were against new legislation that made it illegal to insult the president, expanded blasphemy laws, and infringed upon various civil liberties. It's important to remember that the lives of teenagers were taken as they fought for democracy and a better future. And yes, it is absolutely remarkable that young people are standing up for themselves and working together to create a safer, more unified world. But at what cost? Missing out on an education? Persecution? Death? Every single day, young people are risking their lives because they've been given no other choice by their adult counterparts. And what about the everyday teenagers who are also carrying such a heavy weight on their shoulders? The teenagers who we adults often dismiss as hormonal and rebellious, and we ignore their pleas because they'll figure it out when they're older. We preach to these teenagers that they too can be just like Greta Thunberg and Malala Yousafzai, but when the pressure becomes too much and they go to the adults in their lives for help, what do? We downplay and we dismiss their emotions, their ideas, and their struggles because they're young. Because they're in the easiest part of life, right? We don't embrace their powers as teenagers. And ironically, it is where teenagers go to receive an education, to learn how to create a better world, that they are being the most discouraged. And as an educator myself, it pains me to say the following statement, but it is the harsh reality. School is the #1 cause of stress amongst teenagers. And when they are overstressed, they can't focus on their powers of being the future. And there are plenty of reasons for this school-induced stress, but the first being early start times. William Dement, who is a professor at Stanford University, found that sending students to school at 7 a.m. is equivalent to sending adults to work at 4 in the morning. Now, I'm not sure about the rest of you, but I would not be able to function if I did teach students at 4 a.m. I would be very, very bad at my job. And the reason for this sleep deprivation is that teenage circadian rhythms operate 2 hours behind that of an average adult, naturally making teenagers night owls. A study done by the Brown University School of Medicine found that 9th and 10th grade students in the United States get an average of 7 hours of sleep on a school night versus the recommended 9. So how do we solve this sleep deprivation crisis? Later start times. Countless studies done all over the world have found that students who go to school at 8:30 in the morning or later get more hours of sleep per night. Therefore, they are more attentive, they learn more, and their academic performances improve. But for the overwhelming majority of teenagers around the world who go to school before 8:30 in the morning, they're getting less sleep, they're struggling to pay attention, they're not learning what they could, and their academic performances are suffering. And this directly connects to the second cause of how school suppresses the powers of teenagers, is the pressure to get good grades and balance all of their activities. Between parents, teachers, and universities, we all have high expectations of these young adults in our lives, which is good. Wanting the best for our students is our jobs. But at what point do these high expectations become unrealistic and too much to bear? Nearly 60% of teenagers say that the pressure to balance all of their activities causes them stress, and another 10% associate that particular stress with earning lower grades. So of course, school is supposed to be challenging, but is it supposed to be so stress-inducing to the point that students are earning lower grades? To the point that their mental health is deteriorating? No. The answer is always no. If we are going to expect teenagers to earn good grades, be involved in extracurricular activities, get 9 hours of sleep, maintain healthy relationships, enjoy their youth while simultaneously plan for their future, then we have got to do a better job of supporting them. And the first step in this support is to implement social emotional programs in schools. These programs focus on mental health and teaching students how to identify various emotions and learning to work with them rather than against them, and also emphasizes the values of empathy. Social emotional programs give students the opportunity to take time out of their busy school days to reflect on their well-being through activities like journaling, goal setting, mindfulness, and yoga. And if students have a chance to de-stress and regroup during the day, then maybe, just maybe, they'll have a little bit more time to focus on their powers of being in the future. And the second step in supporting our teenagers to feel less overwhelmed is for all of us adults to recognize that being a teenager is hard. And I understand it's not the adult version of hard, where we have taxes, loans, bills to pay, families to take care of. But that doesn't make the difficulty of being a teenager any easier. We were all teenagers at one point in time, yet it's so common for us adults to throw those memories away and isolate the teenagers that we have now. It seems that we give them copious amounts of support during their formative years, but then they become young adults and suddenly they no longer need it. And research has shown that the older students become, the worse job us adults do at making them feel cared for. And particularly, the worst job us teachers do. And so the first step in making our teenagers feel cared for is to verbalize it. But a Gallup poll, sorry, I messed up. Woo, nervous. A Gallup poll surveyed 3,000 5th and 11th grade students and asked them if they felt that an adult at school cared about them. Nearly 70% of the 5th graders agreed with that statement, which is good, but 70% could be improved. Yet by the time those students reached 11th grade, that number decreased to just 24%. So not even a fourth of teenagers felt that an adult at school cared about them, which is completely unacceptable. And I'm sure that if you ask any secondary teacher or education professional who has ever existed, of course they would tell you that they care about the students in their lives. So why don't our teenagers feel this way? And what can us adults do to make them feel cared for? The first step, which might seem rather obvious, is for us to verbalize that we care. Simple, right? But in my own experience as a teenager and now as an educator, I found that it's not that common for teachers to explicitly tell their students, I care about you. It's um, as adults, we often assume that people go into education because they care about the youth. But students don't always see it that way. Oftentimes, students believe that their teachers care more about content or achieving certain test scores more than they do about the students themselves. And sadly, that is sometimes true. And so, the second step in how we make our teenagers feel cared for after we verbalize it is to act on that. And again, this does not have to be super complicated. This is as easy as greeting them by name and with a smile on your face, asking how their weekends are going, ask how their weeks are going, how their weekends were, taking genuine interest in their hobbies, and explicitly communicating to them that you are a pillar of support, not just academic, but social, emotional, and mental support as well. If these beholders of the future know and feel that we truly care about them, then the more likely they'll be to come to us when they need support. So, all of these stressors, early start times that create a lack of sleep, a performance based society with high expectations to be good at everything, and not feeling cared about in school all contribute to the staggering rates of stress that teenagers face today. The American Psychology Association has found that teenagers now face more stress than any generation who has come before them. And when asked about what issues their peers were facing, an overwhelming majority said anxiety and depression. Not the stereotypical teenage issues we think of, like broken friendships or alcohol abuse, but anxiety and depression. And the study also found that these levels of stress transcend income, meaning that students of all socioeconomic statuses are not only thinking about the world that they will inherit, but their own future as well and how to change it. In fact, modern youth are more likely to worry about events like climate change, mass shootings, and political turmoil than that of their adult counterparts. So now, more than any other time in the world, teenagers are thinking about the world that they are going to grow into and how to change it. So, how do we fix this epidemic, this crisis of teenage stress and anxiety? Slowly, carefully, and as a united front. Parents, teachers, social, and educational institutions all need to come together in recognizing that teenagers have incredible powers and that we must do a better job of fostering them. And we do this through 4 steps. The first being later start times. The second step, implementing social emotional programs in schools. Step 3, recognizing that being a teenager is difficult. And 4, openly and explicitly caring for these students in our lives. By sincerely applying all of these steps, then the stress rates amongst teenagers will decrease, and they will have more time to focus and embrace their powers of being the future. And if all teenagers are aware of this power, then they too can become like Greta Thunberg, Malala Yousafzai, and the Indonesian youth. And if we adults support them in this process, then they won't have to risk their lives, health, and happiness for it. Thank you.